So welcome to our RISE webinar. This session is entitled Hope and Faith, the Value of Optimism, which is just such an important topic, especially as we continue. We just hit our 1-year anniversary of the whole lockdown or shutdown, whatever you want to call it. So definitely optimism is needed during this time. And yes, this will be recorded and we will be pasting it to our website for follow-up within a couple of days. So as always, of course, as first responders, we have a member that's having to respond to a scene. So as always, thank you for what you do day in and day out as first responders, first to the call to protect our community and respond. We really appreciate just everything, and just the fact that some of you are able to jump on just for a second just shows that it's helpful for us to know that the word is being passed around, that we have these webinars, we have these short series where we can share and learn from each other. So thank you, everyone. My name is Ravi Maharaj. I'll be your Zoom host for today. So if there's ever any need for any technical support or any type of information that you need, definitely please message me in the Zoom chat under Ravi Maharaj, and I'll be able to help you out. But right now, I want to hand off to our facilitator. This session, we're going to welcome Brett Keller. He is a member of the RISE team. He is a New Jersey EMT, and he is a 911 dispatcher. So definitely excited to have Brett facilitate this webinar. So Brett, I hand off to you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ravi, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you're enjoying your day. We're excited to have you with us and to show you the program we put together for our fellow first responders. So please feel free to use the chat box. You can say hi, where you're from, make any comments, or if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the chat box for that. New Jersey First Responder COVID Line is part of the Rutgers National Call Center. We are part of the New Jersey Hope and Healing, which is a FEMA-funded project that addresses the emotional and behavioral health needs of New Jersey residents concerned about the COVID-19 pandemic. The RISE program is specific for our state's dedicated first responders. Next slide. So our RISE program offers 4 primary support services. The first being peer-staffed crisis helplines, webinars, which you are part of today, virtual support groups to allow you to come together and to talk to one another, and our database of resources and outreach programs to connect to you while you're serving everyone else. Next slide. So here's the team and faces behind the phone lines, minus myself and a few other new arrivals to our program. We are the ones sitting with you during the support groups and here with you during our webinar. We are staffed with first responders just like you, retired and active during the pandemic. We have over 100 years of combined experience working in law enforcement, fire, EMS, and the armed forces. Now we ask the RISE staff to introduce themselves in the chat box. Next slide. So our webinar series follows the UPenn, the University of Pennsylvania resiliency model. And here are the 6 skills we have discussed throughout our webinar series to help you build your resilience and help prevent anxiety and depression. Over the past several weeks, we have discussed self-awareness, or learning to become aware of our mental and physical states, particularly under periods of stress. Self-regulation, learning to regulate our thinking, our impulses, and behaviors, particularly when we're in this fight or flight state. Mental agility, how we can rearrange our thinking when things don't go as planned. Strength of character, the importance of finding our personal strengths to best tackle and overcome challenges. Connection, the importance of building and maintaining strong, trusting relationships. And of course, today we'll be discussing the last skill in our series, optimism. Next slide. So I think it's important that we first define what optimism is. And the first definition is the UPenn resiliency model's definition. And that's the ability to notice and expect the positive, to focus on what you can control and to take purposeful action. And then another definition is hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of a situation. And notice I underlined this portion in the resiliency models definition because it's going to be really integral to the rest of our webinar because it focuses on and highlights an area where we have control, where we can practice and we can build upon. Next slide. So we defined what optimism is, but I think it's also really important that we talk about what it isn't. And the opposite of optimism is pessimism, or a tendency to see the worst aspect of things, or believe that the worst will happen. It's a lack of hope or confidence in the future. And pessimism and the persistent belief that events will turn out badly despite your attempts to change them can lead to a state known as learned helplessness, which is essentially where an individual ceases to try to avoid negative outcomes or to try to improve their situation. Next slide. So some more about learned helplessness. The phenomenon of learned helplessness was actually first described by Martin Seligman, who is the founder of the UPenn Positive Psychology Center, which is where we actually get the resiliency skill set that we're discussing today. And he conducted pioneering work in the 1960s on the phenomenon of learned helplessness. This phenomenon was first observed in dogs when they were administered electrical shocks that they felt they can no longer avoid. They eventually just stopped trying to escape them, even when later given the opportunity to. And then this was later adapted to and studied in humans. It's important to understand this concept of learned helplessness because when people feel or are convinced that they have no control over their situation, they may begin to behave in a helpless manner, or so-called learned helplessness. This inaction can lead people to overlook opportunities for relief or change. And so just to give some background on that graphic of that chained elephant, it's an example of learned helplessness. The traditional way of training elephants in Asia was to take a young elephant and chain it to a tree. It would try again and again to break free, and eventually it would just give up and cease trying. As the elephant grew older, the chain could be replaced with a light rope. And so even though it could be easily broken by an adult elephant, it would seldom try to escape, thinking that there was no point in trying. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. You can go back one. And it's really important to understand this notion of learned helplessness because the research shows that learned helplessness and this phenomenon is highly associated with increased perceived stress, anxiety, depression, and burnout. And so now we're just going to have a brief Zoom poll just to kind of get a baseline understanding of our views on and our use of optimism. So Ravi, if you can just start that Zoom poll. All right, so hopefully everyone can see the results here. So the first one is, I find I am able to remain optimistic despite setbacks and challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so far those are some pretty promising results. I'm glad most people, for the most part, seem to feel they can be pretty optimistic despite setbacks. Next one, I believe optimism is essential to my long-term success and happiness. Okay, so once again, most people seem to strongly agree with that. When situations don't go my way, I believe I am helpless to change them. Strongly disagree. Okay, those are the responses we're looking for. Some of you still seem to agree with that. We'll see if maybe throughout the rest of this webinar, we can change some of your minds on that. In my work as a first responder, I believe that being both realistic and optimistic is often impossible. Okay, so I expected some mixed results on this one. I can definitely relate to this thinking. You know, sometimes we feel that, you know, in situations, treating patients, dealing with the general public, for example, that, you know, you have to be realistic. You have to, you know, you can't ignore the challenges that you're facing. But I still think that maybe throughout this webinar, we can change some of your minds and show you that maybe being realistic and optimistic can often be one and the same. Then lastly, I believe that optimism is a trait that you were born with or without. Okay, interesting. I expected most people to more agree with that. But it seems that most people strongly disagree with that. So yeah, I mean, we'll see if we can change some of your minds. Some of the rest of you who seem to agree that you're either born with or without that. All right, let's get back to the presentation. Okay, so we just have a brief video for you guys, and this is just kind of covering some of the misconceptions on optimism. You can take it away, Robbie.
What we have found across many different groups and cultures that optimism is a very important part of resilience.
Huge.
It's a part of resilience,
It's
part of resilience. That
Definitely.
some people seem to be born optimistic from day one. Um, but I think you can make people somewhat more optimistic. How? I'm going to ask you to answer that.
Well, you know,
Certain forms of therapy can do that, but I'd be interested in what you think.
optimism is seen as something, think that everything with a silver lining, you're naive and so forth. It's not that.
That's not.
No.
It's about seeing a potential for change. If you say, I'm hopeless, this is like that, I'm wired like that, my baseline is just on the floor, I'll never make it, of course, you'll not even try. But if you think there's a potential for change, even it takes time, even the journey is long, then you will, step by step, you'll be happy to do that journey. So it's very important. Real optimism is identifying that potential for change.
When you're told the father,
What you said about
So this brings us to our next slide, which is, so what's the secret basically? And this is kind of supposed to be a kind of a comic, notion of what most people might think of what optimism means, which is kind of this like naivety about, oh, just hang in there, just kind of ignore the challenges. And I think it's important that we dispel some of these common misconceptions about optimism. As the video mentioned, it's not a naivety or ignorance about life's challenges. For example, like saying, just hang in there. It's a choice to look beyond momentary obstacles and instead opportunities for change. Next, Robbie. So what is optimism really? It's believing that future events are promising. It takes practice, it takes courage, but it's more the belief that current events don't dictate our future success or happiness. Next slide. This is a quote that I love by Friedrich Nietzsche, and it's, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." This quote references this repeated idea that with the right intention and purpose, people can persevere through and endure more than otherwise possible. As first responders, when we find our purpose, our so-called why, and we strive to live it, we can overcome more obstacles in our past. If you know why your life and your work is important, and you know what that your goal is a positive one, you can suffer through almost any defeat without giving up or quitting. Next slide. It's another really inspiring quote that I just love. It's by Viktor Frankl, who's an Austrian neurologist, or was an Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor. His story is outlined in one of my favorite books called Man's Search for Meaning, which I highly recommend people reading if they haven't already. And the quote is, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." When we find ourselves in situations outside of our control, being optimistic is as simple as a matter of choice, of reframing our situation and looking for opportunities for change. Next slide. Well, without further ado, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Zishan Haroon, U.S. Army Sergeant and Peer Support Specialist for the New Jersey Vet for Vet program.
Thank you so much, Brett. Everyone can hear me, I'm guessing. First off, thank you so much for having me. And this is a great opportunity for everyone. A little bit about myself. My name is Z. I am a peer support specialist at New Jersey Vet to Vet. We're a peer support line for veterans, veteran families, and everyone in the veteran community. I've been with them for about 2 years, and before then I was working at Vets for Warriors, which is our a global peer support program for veterans and veteran communities. So a little bit about myself. I joined the military at 17 years old. My mom had to sign, so my mom had to sign for me to join. I felt like, just like everyone, it was just a normal deployment that I had, but it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. But I'm not going to get too much into the deployment. I just wanted to really focus on what happens after the deployment. The guilt and the strong-mindedness that we think that nothing's going to bother us. We're very strong. I feel like, some people are very strong-minded, and nothing really bothers us. So with that being said, I instead of dealing with my issues, I went to the bottle, and that never ends well. Now, it was, I would say, 6 years ago, when I got my wake up call. I had great friends around me that took me, and I was an inpatient for PTSD, combat PTSD, for about 45 to 50 days, which was the best thing I think I could have ever done. Changed my life. I recommend every veteran to go through that. It's just a recharge. So that's when I learned the coping mechanisms and the techniques, and I learned how to meditate. And before then, I wasn't very hopeful. I wasn't very hopeful that I was going to be able to ever come out of the depression or the anxiety and the just everything that comes with it, the dreams, the nightmares. I just thought that was just going to be my reality. And that's because I didn't want to get out of the rut. In the military, we call it, we love the suck. So I was just comfortable in the suck. And then came the coping techniques and meditation. And once I learned those, and the hopefulness came through, and it was one of the best things that anyone can do. So always be hopeful. That's one thing if you can take anything out of this, is be hopeful that it will work out. Now, if you keep digging yourself a little lower and lower, you might stay there. So always be hopeful. A lot of people, just like how we're strong-minded to get us in a rut, we're also very strong-minded to get out of that rut. And I think that's, in the military, we call it mind over matter. And I definitely agree with what the video that Brett played earlier. You can get out of it. You can do it, but I feel like you got to do it for yourself. So if anyone's in any kind of rut, or you feel down, you can definitely get out of it, and I think you can do it. Other than that, I think if any questions, I'll take any questions. Brad, if you want me to touch on something else, I want to keep it very short and simple.
No, I really just want to thank you for speaking and the courage to do that. And, I think that people can look to people like you, and, how you face the challenges of deployment, of coming back, for example, and dealing with all the, the fallout, the PTSD and things like that. Maybe we can't relate to that specifically, but we can certainly relate to, the challenges associated with that. And that, the turning point for you was where essentially you made a decision to look for opportunities for change, to embrace the resources around you. And that was really, when things started becoming actually, better for you. I just want to thank Z for speaking for us, and invite people, if they have any questions or comments, please, put that in the chat box. All right. So now we're going to have more thank yous. Thank you, Z. So now we're going to have a breakout session. We're going to break off into small groups, probably going to take between like 5 and 7 minutes, and really just kind of give you an opportunity to discuss the premise of optimism. And so here's something that I can leave you with to discuss in these breakout sessions. So I encourage you to all discuss your experiences as first responders, specifically when you made the decision to push past challenges and to get out of negative thinking, how things turned out. So we're going to break into individual groups for about 5 to 7 minutes, as I mentioned, and then we're going to come back. Yeah, so I hope everyone had a productive breakout discussion. Yeah, our group had a discussion about, we talked about, like, it came up kind of in Z's talk about, his experience with the military and coming back home. And this is one of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk about in this webinar, but I was thinking about touching on, which is, there was an article that I read that talked about, optimistic thinkers, and we've already mentioned this a bit, but optimistic thinkers, they'll try over and over again to improve their situation despite setbacks, whereas pessimistic thinkers, more often than not, they engage in avoidance behaviors and distractions. And I thought it would be kind of useful for some of us to consider all the ways in which we kind of indulge in distractions and kind of escapes from reality. And I think Z might agree with this notion that, like, for example, like, his use of alcohol when he came back home. And I mean, I could certainly relate to a lot of these things as well, but like, they're an attempt to kind of escape from reality as opposed to face reality and look for, opportunities for change and look for things that we can work on, and embrace reality. So yeah, it was a very good discussion. I hope that you guys had some pretty beneficial discussions as well. And so, so far we've really kind of talked about like the theory of optimism, the kind of philosophical approaches to be optimistic, which is really good, I think. But I think also, we want practical solutions. What are practical steps that we can take? So next slide, Ravi. So these are 9 steps and ways to support optimism on a daily basis, steps that you can take every single day, practically speaking. And the first one is to stay active. Exercise has been shown again and again to boost mood, improve cognition, and positive thinking, often rivaling antidepressant medications in a lot of clinical trials. Next is practice daily gratitude. Look for things to be grateful for. Being confined during a pandemic has changed all of our lives, but it's also provided certain opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't have. For some of us, if we live with family, we've been spending more time with family. If we have kids at home, we've been spending more time and had more opportunity to spend with those children. For example, like our pets love this pandemic. We've probably spent more time with our pets than we ever have. A lot of people have gone out and adopted dogs that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So looking for things to be grateful for is really essential to being optimistic. Next is eat well. What we put into our bodies invariably impacts how we feel. Strive to make healthy dietary decisions. Maybe learn to cook. Avoid excessive alcohol and unhealthy foods. Next is mental hygiene. Look for ways to care for your mind and reduce external stressors. Listen to music, practice mindfulness and meditation, and find ways to de-stress and relax. Get outside. Being outside surrounded by nature has been shown again and again to improve positive thinking. A 2015 Stanford University study demonstrated that participants who were exposed to the outdoors had lower activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is a brain region that is active during excessive rumination, and was associated with a decrease in repetitive thoughts focusing on negative emotions. Be selective about your mental inputs. Being selective about the information that you consume. Avoiding or reducing sensationalized news and media that often focuses on negative or graphic stories to keep you drawn in. These can distort our sense of reality and lead us to draw more negative conclusions about the world we live in. Next is be of service. We already kind of touched upon this when we discussed the notion of our why and what our purpose is as first responders. Look for opportunities to be of help to others. As first responders, we can often take these opportunities for granted, becoming cynical of and removed from the people that we serve. Being able to get out of yourself and your worries to help those in need is an excellent way to remain optimistic. Next is go from I can't because to how can I? It's a simple matter of perspective. It's making the choice to look for opportunities for success rather than focusing on the failure. And lastly, engage with others. Surround yourself with other optimistic people and encourage others to also think positively. All right, next we're just going to watch a video that kind of covers some of the science and benefits of gratitude, its relationship to maintaining an optimistic outlook, and ultimately its role in resilience. You can take it away, Robbie.
Research shows that adopting an attitude of gratitude, simply expressing appreciation and being more thankful, can measurably improve your overall well-being. For example, studies prove that gratitude can increase happiness, reduce depression, and strengthen resiliency. Grateful people often experience reduced blood pressure, less chronic pain, increased energy, even longer lives. People who purposefully express more gratitude report higher self-esteem than those who don't, and they're more likely to help others. A pro-social behavior also linked to greater happiness. People who capture grateful thoughts before bed sleep better than those who don't. Why so many positive changes? Because gratitude actually rewires our brains, kickstarting the production of dopamine and serotonin. Like antidepressants, these feel-good neurotransmitters activate the bliss center of the brain, creating feelings of happiness and contentment. This appears to be self-perpetuating. Research suggests that with regular practice, you'll train your prefrontal cortex to better appreciate and retain positive experiences and thoughts, and to deflect the negative ones. Here are a few simple ways to deliberately cultivate that attitude of gratitude. Celebrate minor accomplishments. Think about what you have rather than dwelling on what you don't. Tell the people in your life something you appreciate about them. Tell yourself too. Volunteer, hold a door for a stranger, or simply smile more, and you'll probably feel better, as kindness and giving are connected to gratitude. Similar positive brain changes can occur from regular meditation and mindfulness. Keep a daily gratitude journal using an old-fashioned notebook or a high-tech app. The science is clear. Give gratitude a go. You'll be thankful you did.
All right. What a perfect video to end with to kind of summarize today's webinar. I want to express some gratitude to Zishan for being vulnerable and sharing his story and offering, real life, what it takes to kind of go into that space of being optimist, to using optimism in his journey. I want to thank Brett for all this great information that you shared. I think it's really helpful for first responders to hear this. It's, these are things that we have to remind each other of and to continue to kind of share with other colleagues. I also wanted to, of course, I'm putting into the chat box, we invite any type of feedback that you're willing to offer. This is a short link. It's anonymous. It'll take 1 to 2 minutes. We want to continue to build these webinars based on your feedback and based on information that we hear from you. So we definitely invite you to click that link in the chat box. And again, we want to remind you that to tune in next time. Our next resilience webinar is on self-awareness, and that'll be on April 14th at 1 p.m. You could register on the firstresponders.com page. This was a little different this time, where we actually have a registration link. So you put in your name, your email, and you will get registered. You will get emailed that Zoom link, as opposed to in the past, I've been sending them out. So please share with your colleagues. We invite everyone to join us on April 14th for our next webinar. And as always, we just want to say thank you to each and every one of you, to the first responders in New Jersey and the community, for continuing to protect us, to respond, to help us day in and day out. The community thanks you. And we hope that these webinars offer a little bit of gratitude to each of you, to all the squads and all to the firehouses, to everywhere that individuals or first responders. We want to just say thank you. Please reach out to us anytime. Our number is 833-237-4325. And again, let's rise together. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next time.